Hello, Open Door Ministries, and to all our friends and family on Facebook. We are continuing our series on disturbing questions. And this week, the question is, were there dinosaurs on the Ark? Now, this is one of those difficult Sunday school questions that can cause problems when little kids ask their Sunday school teachers. Now, when I was a small child, I loved Noah and the Ark. As I told you before, I went to the church-run school all the way from preschool up until high school. And I've heard the story of Noah and the Ark a million times. But as a small child, I really love this story. I mean, what's not to like? You've got all kinds of animals, and you've got rainbows, and really cool coloring pages to color, and you get to use all the different crayons because of the rainbows. So I love this story as a kid, but as you get older, you begin to have some questions about it. Now, back in 1976, there was a movie called In Search of Noah's Ark, and it was based upon a book of the same name. This was actually the sixth highest grossing movie in 1976. It made a lot of money, especially for a documentary. It purported to prove that Noah's Ark was up on Mount Ararat. Is that true? Is that not true? Well, you're going to have to read the book for yourself, or you can check out my blog. I do answer that question. One of the other things that I like to see is the Ark Encounter in Kentucky. Now, Ken Ham spent a fortune to build what he says is a replica of the Ark. And inside of the Ark, it has all kinds of exhibits trying to explain what life on the Ark would be like, including these sort of Gilligan's Island kind of contraptions that would take food to the animals and carry away waste and all those kind of things. But it's an interesting museum to go to. One of the things that I think is really funny is if you look at the pictures of when this particular Ark Encounter was being constructed, because outside the Ark, you'll see giant cranes. And you wonder to yourself, where were those in the Bible? I don't remember Noah having any particular heavy-duty machinery cranes to help him build this. One of the funniest things I think about the Ark Encounter is that there was heavy-duty rain in 2017, and the owners of this biblical Noah's Ark replica had to sue over rain damage to the property. Here we have an ark that's supposed to survive 40 days of rain and floods, and it sort of got damaged in just one particular storm. Now, there are a lot of questions that begin to pop up about Noah and the Ark. There are questions that just disturb your Sunday school teacher. These are things that children will ask their teachers. These are questions that disturb Sunday school teachers that are asked by children. One of those questions is, were there dinosaurs on the Ark? Now, think about this. When you think about the size of the Ark, are you really going to be able to fit an Apatosaurus on there, or say a Tyrannosaurus Rex? And teachers come up with some very creative answers for this. Some of them say, well, they just took baby dinosaurs with them. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's one of those questions that Sunday school teachers are not very fond of. One of the other questions is, why didn't the animals eat each other? I mean, you have lions and lambs, tigers and goats. Why aren't the carnivore large predators eating these smaller animals like rabbits? And of course, my Sunday school teacher told me, well, God made all the animals go to sleep, and so everything was fine. But my favorite question was always, what about the fish? If God destroyed all life on the planet except for Noah and his family and all the animals that were in the ark, what about the fish that were in the ocean? Like, did they die? What happened to the dolphins? Did they die? I mean, they live and breathe in water, so how could this flood somehow destroy them? And of course, my Sunday school teacher simply didn't have an answer for that. She said, well, they probably just died anyway because the water changed. And so I guess Noah had to take extra fish on board, but she never really had a great answer for that. But as you get older, there are questions that begin to disturb adults. Questions like, Did God commit genocide? Because indeed, God is responsible for the death of every human being on the planet except for 8 people. Isn't this an act of genocide? Doesn't this make God a moral monster? And then we have other questions like, seriously? Noah took 2 of everything, of every species? I mean, there are 350 species of parrots. Did he take 2 of each one of those? Now, my Bible teachers told me, well, what they did was they sort of took kinds of animals, like one kind of bird or a couple of kinds of birds and a couple of kinds of wolves and a couple of kinds of the large predator cats. And these all eventually changed into all the other animals. So it wasn't as many animals as you think. One of the questions that I always wonder about is, why would we save the cockroaches? Did Noah take cockroaches on the ark, and why? And a lot of people have asked me about, well, what about mosquitoes? Why do we need mosquitoes? Why do we have mosquitoes on the ark or spiders? Did Noah take all the insects on the ark, and why would he take them on the ark? We don't really seem to need them very much, do we? So there's always lots of questions about this particular story. And once again, what we find out is it doesn't really cause difficulty for those who believe in science unless you're a fundamentalist. Let's take a look at a couple of things. One of my favorite explanations for what happened to the dinosaurs and whether or not dinosaurs were on the ark comes from one of my favorite cartoonists, Jack Chick. Now, Jack Chick, as I was growing up, drew chick tracts, and these were everywhere and on every possible subject. And indeed, Jack Chick didn't disappoint. He has an explanation for what happened to the dinosaurs. Now, Jack Chick says that if you check the Bible, that God created man and animals and plants in the same week, and that included dinosaurs. So Jack Chick believes that dinosaurs and human beings lived at the same time. But more than that, that when Noah began putting all the animals on the ark, he put on dragons, which were dinosaurs, and that he took them on the ark, and that after the flood and everybody perished and they landed on Mount Ararat, he let them back out again. But they were fruitful and they multiplied, according to Jack Chick. There were more dinosaurs. However, because God killed off all the plants, and plants create oxygen, there was less oxygen in the world. And dinosaurs are very large animals, and they need a lot of oxygen. So with thinner atmosphere, with less oxygen, they had to slow down. Not that I knew that dinosaurs were particularly fast, but they had to slow down, which made them easier to catch. And that human beings then hunted dinosaurs for food to extinction. And that's why there's no dinosaurs around today. They were on the ark and they just got really slow and they got all eaten up and now they're gone. Except the only problem is we don't have any kind of record whatsoever of dinosaurs living together with human beings. There's no evidence for it, no written record for it. So Jack Chick is just sort of making stuff up. You're not going to find any of these things that he's saying in the Bible itself. And here's a man who purports to not only be a King James only kind of guy, but a sola scriptura. If it's not in the Bible, it's not true kind of guy. Let's talk about the idea of genocide. Did God create genocide? If the story of Noah is literally true, then God is the greatest mass murderer of all time. And we have to ask ourselves, is it really justice for the wickedness that was supposedly on the earth at that time, that every man, woman, child, and infant would die except for Noah and his family? Is it justice to destroy all the other animals and all the plants? To literally destroy all of creation? Is that justice? Or is God genocidal? See, this leads us to the question, is this real? Did this actually happen? I would say that this is one of those sort of TV kind of movie kind of stories, or one of those Hollywood kind of stories that's based on a true story, but not really very literally factual. See, I believe that there were floods all around the world, especially after the last ice age. After the last ice age, and the world began to heat up and the ice sheets began to retreat, there were numerous floods. For example, here in the United States, in the Columbia River Gorge in Washington and Oregon, there were over 40 massive floods during a 2,000-year period. Now, we can assume that all over the world, similar things were happening, that there were massive floods over a long period of time, and that many cultures and civilizations experienced devastating floods, and that these became the basis for many of the flood stories that we find across every culture and every civilization. Flood stories were told orally and passed down from generation to generation until they were finally written down. One of the interesting stories that's out there is the Atrahasis. It's the Akkadian Babylonian epic of the Great Flood sent by the gods to destroy human life. Only the good man, Atrahasis, was warned of the impending deluge by the god Enki, who instructed him to build an ark and save himself. Atrahasis heeded the words of the god, loaded 2 of every kind of animal into the ark, and so preserved life on earth. This ancient Akkadian Babylonian story predates the writing of the Bible. And it's assumed that the Jewish people who lived in Babylonian captivity would have been familiar with this story. And as is rabbinic and Talmudic tradition, altering stories to make a new theological point was commonplace. And so it's thought that they probably took this story and altered it to change the theological viewpoint. This is an archetypical story. The Jewish writers probably adapted the ancient Babylonian stories, which were based on oral tradition of actual floods. And they altered the story to change the theology of it and to teach us something about humankind and God. When we look at the theology that's in the Atrahasis story, it's multiple gods who decide to destroy the human race because of overpopulation, not because they were wicked, there were just too many of them. And Enki, one of the gods, breaks his promise and he saves Atrahasis. He sneaks away and he talks from behind a wall to tell one person to build an ark and take animals with him. He breaks in rebellion with the other gods. But when you look at the theology of Noah, it's a different story. The story has been changed, one, to show monotheism, one God only. And it's not overpopulation, but wickedness that brings destruction, and righteousness which brings salvation. It's not a rebellious God that saves people, but it's a God who is drawn to the righteousness of a singular individual. God cares not only about human beings, but about the animals as well as he saves them. God chooses to save what is precious to him. When you look at the dimensions of the ark as described in the Bible, it's literally a box shape. And what it seems to represent is that God takes his precious creation and puts it in a box to save it. There's a few other archetypical symbols in here. One, it's about seawater and chaos. Now, in the Babylonian mindset, in the Babylonian stories, seawater represents chaos. Tiamat, the Babylonian god of the sea, was also representative of the forces of chaos. And so having a flood would represent chaos, or the chaos god then in ruling and control. But in the story of Noah, it is God who controls the sea. God is in control of chaos. God is sovereign. It's interesting to note that God is able to use both chaos and to control it. In Genesis chapter 7, verse 2, there's something that's interesting that's a bit, anachronistic. Let's take a look at what it has to say there. It says, "Take with you 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, a male and its mate, and 1 pair of every kind of unclean animal, a male and its mate. And also 7 pairs of every kind of bird, male and female, to keep the various kinds alive throughout the earth." Now, this is one of those kind of interesting things, because as a child, you always picture the animals coming on 2 by 2. But actually, the clean animals came on in groups of 7, and the unclean animals came out in groups of 2. But this causes a problem, because the Bible was originally passed down by oral tradition and wasn't written down until a much later time. And this creates sort of this anachronism that happens, something that's out of place, out of time. The idea of clean and unclean animals didn't exist during Noah's time because there was no Mosaic law. These laws came in long after the existence of Noah, when the Israelites crossed over into the promised land. So for God to say to Noah, "Take clean ones or unclean ones," if it were true to the time period, and literally and factually happened, there would have been no idea in Noah's mind what a clean or unclean animal was. This is something that was added later when the story was written down. And it's one of the things that tips us off that this is an archetypical story rather than a literally true factual story. So what does this all mean? It means that Noah wasn't a real person, but representative of righteous people, and that there were no dinosaurs on the ark, and that the story teaches truth, but it isn't factually, literally true. And so we don't need to try to prove that the flood actually happened. We don't need to go find Noah's Ark up on Mount Ararat. What we need to do is to search for the truth that the writers were trying to communicate to us. For as Paul wrote in Romans chapter 15, verse 4, "For everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through the endurance taught in the scriptures and the encouragement they provide, we might have hope." Paul recognizes that the things that the ancient Jewish people chose to write down were written to teach us and to provide us examples and to encourage us and to give us hope. He doesn't say that they were written down to be a textbook on science or a textbook on history. He recognizes that these were not necessarily factual stories, but metaphorical stories. So how do we live this out? How do we worship God by living this truth out? One of the things is to look for the truth within the story. And the truth in this story is that God's protective hand protects us from the chaos that we create. In this story of Noah, the flood comes because people are wicked. It's our wickedness that creates chaos, and God removes his protective hand, and suddenly the chaos comes in like a flood and destroys people. That judgment is when he removes his protective hand. Oftentimes, we are the authors of our own destruction. And if it wasn't for God protecting us, we would probably meet it much sooner. The other truths that we can pick up is that God loves humanity and seeks to save them. Humanity is precious to him. That God loves his creation of animals. We need to remember this, that God saved the animals as well. Even they were precious to him. But most important, that obedience brings blessing. Because Noah lived a righteous life, God saved him. And this is a message for us as well, to live a righteous life. For in that righteous life, we ride above the chaos and we have blessings in our life. One of the last things I want to kind of point out is the rainbow at the end of the story of Noah. God puts his bow in the sky to remind us that he will not flood the earth anymore, that he will not allow chaos to overtake the earth anymore. But it's an interesting symbol here, because what we have, it doesn't say that God puts his rainbow in the sky. It says that God put his bow in the sky. And that bow is the same word that we would use for the bow of a warrior, for archery. God takes his instrument of war and he hangs it up. There's a beautiful truth here that God is declaring, I am not at war with you, and I do not need my weapon. I'm hanging up my weapon and I am declaring peace. I think it's interesting that in the story of Noah, where he hangs up his bow and he declares peace, that I will not be a warrior God anymore, that when Jesus came, God incarnate, the ultimate communication of who God is, the first words that were spoken were peace on earth, goodwill towards men. God is a God of peace and not a God of war. And that is a truth that we need to worship our God for. That's it for this week. And until next time, may God bless you. Go in peace.